So when my grandma died a few years ago, I felt like a chapter was closing on my life. She was the matriarch of our family and like the one who pulled us all together. So without her, I wondered, would there ever be a reason to go back to like that part of Ohio where I grew up? If you've ever been there, you know why. Why would you ever go there? I don't know. So I was heading back, and I decided to take that opportunity to go to my hometown, like the area I grew up, and go visit some friends I hadn't seen in 20 years, and then went to the old farmhouse where I grew up. And when I pull up in front of the farmhouse, I wasn't quite prepared for it. I felt this weight in my chest, on my arms, this immense weight. Like every piece of that property was heavy with these meaning, with memories, with my life. Across the fields, and that porch, and that front room, and under that tree. Like I could just see myself, my life. I couldn't separate myself from that property, from that space, from that place. It was like in this one moment, I felt this crushing sense of like all of those, my entire childhood collapsed into this one moment. There's this deep sense of seeing all the joy and regret and wonder and teenage angst all at once. Then it happened again this past summer. Took my family to Rome, the eternal city, which is just, if you've ever been, it is so sleazy and loud and beautiful and full of life, which is to say, it's so Italian, yeah? And I love it. I love it. And Rome has been for me for 25 years now. It has been the launching point into my next adventure, my next phase of life. It's where I go when I'm in a major life transition. So right after college, like what do? I go to Rome, and that's where I start my journey into the next phase of life. And then right after I finished seminary, right before we started a family, and life would forever be changed, where do Jenny and I run off to? We start in Rome. That's where we go. And then years later, when my life was collapsing in on itself and burnout, where do I go? To escape from it all? Rome. And then right after my life entirely collapses and I go through burnout, where do I go to begin to heal? Rome. And so this last summer, when we step out onto the streets of Rome, now I'm stepping out 25 years later with my wife and teenage kids onto the streets of Rome. And it hit me. All the uncertainty and laughter, all the heartache and growth, all the regrets and joy, all of it, 25 years compressed into a single moment. I felt it. I'm guessing you know what I'm talking about. I'm guessing you felt it too, because to step back and take in the sweep of time is to feel the weight of your life. It's to witness the brevity of life in the vastness of time. It's to feel like you're looking in on your own life, but from the outside. It's to feel just how short life truly is. It's to experience all of the regret and pride, the peace and angst, the grief and joy, the yearning and satisfaction, all at once, compressed into a single moment. And when this happens, it pries something open at least in my soul, it does. For most of us, it does. It pries something open. It pries open this question. What's it mean? How do I make sense of all of this? Does my life, all the things I've experienced and done and gone and been to and possessed, all of this, when I look at all of it at once, does any of this mean anything? And when we get to that place, God sends us a guide. We don't know his name. In Hebrew, it's Kohelet. In Greek, it's Ecclesiastes. We just translate it as the teacher. God sends us a teacher And this teacher, he wants to bring us to this moment when we are overwhelmed by the sweep of time, when we're taking all of life all at once, that moment when we feel ourselves just struggling to make sense of it all. And he says, hey, let's talk about that. Our text for today is Ecclesiastes chapter 3. It's 540 in your Pew Bible. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. In order to bring us to a place where we can feel the weight of the sweep of time, though, the teacher, he doesn't just drive us to our old childhood home, to a place loaded with memories for us. That's way too small. He doesn't just want us to take in the whole of our lives. He wants us to take in the whole of human life. It's something that you can only see if you step back, if you step way back, if you step outside of time itself. That's the only way you can possibly take it all in. It's something that can only be seen from outside of time, which is to say, it's something that only God can actually see. But somehow you and I can imagine it. And so he invites us to imagine this. And since this is something that we cannot fully comprehend or put into words, he's going to describe it the only way that you can actually describe these types of things in life. Poetry. There's a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for shalom, for peace. Herman Melville, the author of Moby Dick, one of his books, he tells this short story about a doctor who's performing a surgery. And he gets so into it. He's like dissecting, opening up this guy, looking at everything, so analyzing the people around him. He's like showing him, and look at this, and this does this, and this is this, labeling everything, talking about everything as he's doing the surgery, that he's so into it that he doesn't even notice when the patient dies. Yeah. So there's a danger of doing that when we come to this text. We have to be careful when we come to a text like this because it's so easy to get lost in the dissection of every line that we kill the text, that it becomes for us a dead text, that it's just like this cadaver on the table that we're dissecting. But the life of the text is found in the whole, in the poetry. That if you want to understand this text, you have to feel it. You have to turn your speaker way up and listen to Pink Floyd Time. Okay. Coldplay, Clocks. All right. I don't know what your song is, but pick any one of the artists, right, who's explored this mystery of time. That's how you have to enter into this. The whole point of this is that the sweep of time, the brevity of life, and the profound mystery of the one who gives the seasons of life, this can't be grasped. It's meant to overwhelm you. If you collapse all of human life into one moment, it is meant to overwhelm you. You see, humans are trapped within time itself, so we cannot possibly get perspective on time precisely because we're in the middle of it. So any language that is based in space and time is bound to fail. Words will fail. To take in all of human life at once so that we can somehow make sense of it is to attempt to do what God alone can do. To see what God alone can see. So in order to drive this point home, the teacher gives us this poem with these 14 contrasting pairs that kind of span the everything of life, from born to die, plant, uproot, kill, heal. And notice it's 14, 7 times 2, which is just a very Hebrew way of saying, this is it. This is everything any human has ever experienced. This is it. Everything you know and feel and have and experience all at once compressed into one single moment. Take it in. Let it overwhelm you. And notice he begins with the hard limit there of a time to be born and a time to die. And then he moves straight into these God-given rhythms of the seasons that are built into creation itself. It's a time to plant and a time to root. So in an agricultural world, you either learn these seasons or you suffer. You go really hungry. You either find out quickly that you cannot choose the seasons of when to plant and when to uproot. But you better discover them and align your life with them, or you will starve to death. And then this poem thing just cascades into every experience you can imagine. Kill, heal, tear down, build, weep, laugh. On and on it rolls. Now commentators, they note that there appears to be no logical or chronological order to this list. These times, some of them are big and substantial, like war. That's big. And then others are just like this little mundane things, like mending and laughing. Some are obviously good, like, I want to heal. I want to build. I want to laugh. I want to dance. I want to embrace. And then some are just awful. I don't want to kill. I don't want to weep. I don't want to give up. And yet these seasons come and go, and I don't get a choice in the matter. They're not up to me. So if you step back and try and take it all in at once, suddenly the whole of the human experience, everything you do and have and know and see and taste and enjoy and cry over, it all seems so small, so brief, so insubstantial. Like you could fit the entirety of a human life on just a little page with just a date when they're born and when they die. That's it. That's human life. The physicist Sean Carroll, he describes human life this way. He said, it's like the swirl of creamer dramatically mixing into coffee that for just a fraction of a second, it looks this ornate, amazing thing, and then it disperses forever into chaos. Salvador Dali, the famous artist, I was looking into him because I was looking up this picture in particular, the persistence of memory, where he's reflecting on time. And I don't know, maybe you've seen it before. It's at the MoMA. I was reading on the MoMA that he created this, and I quote, after cultivating a self-induced psychotic hallucinations. Can you tell? Yeah. But here's the thing. After he produces this self-induced psychotic hallucination, when he thinks about the meaning of time and the meaning of life, what happens? Time itself, the symbol of human time, clocks, become soft. They become limp. In his words, they become soft like cheese, soft cheese melting in the sun. His words. But what is hard? What is real? It's the tides, it's nature, it's the things that God creates. It's a tree, and it's some bizarre creature that just happens to have the face of Dali himself, which is so weird. Yeah. When we step back and try and take in the whole of human life across the sweep of time, the measure of our lives feels so insubstantial. And God, His seasons, they seem to be so hard. And so this leads the teacher back to that most human, most basic of questions. What do workers gain from their toil? What are we working so hard for? Does any of this matter? Does my life actually make sense? And then that leads him to this. I've seen the burden God has laid on the human race. That when I step back and take it in, to take in the sweep of time is to realize that the past is gone, the future is uncertain, and the present is fleeting. It's fleeting. Like you try and grab a hold of it and it just slips right through your fingers and spills onto the floor. So to take in the sweep of time is to see that the seasons of life are not within your control. You don't get to choose when you're born. You don't get to choose when you live. You don't get to choose any of this. So this is brought up famously. You philosophy students out there on being in time. Heidegger, he gives us this great term. He says it's thrownness. It sounds a lot better in German, though. Geworfenheit. Life is Geworfenheit. There's this thrownness to it. You were just thrown into the world. Like you don't get to choose where you're born. You don't get to choose the time, the era, the family, the culture, any of it. You're just thrown into the world, and there you are screaming, helpless, and now it's up to you. You got to figure it out. To take in the sweep of time is to be confronted with your own limitations, to feel like a swirl of cream in a cup of coffee. It's to be confronted with the limits of what you can know and do and expect. It's to be confronted with the inevitability of aging, loss, and death. So I should probably warn you. There's this old Baptist preacher saying, you got to get them lost if you want to get them saved. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes getting you lost. So here's where I want to start. Simple question. What is time? How hard could that be? So Augustine famously in his Confessions, when he asked this question, he says, time, I know exactly what it is until someone asks me to explain it. And then I have no idea how to explain it. And so this is what it is. That time is something that we all know. We all live in it. It dominates our lives. Yet if you ask any of us, what is time? We're like, So experientially, time, sometimes it seems to speed by, and sometimes it just drags on and on. Like there are whole days and months and seasons of life that you can't remember, that it's like they never existed, and others, like it's like slow motion. You remember everything. It's loaded with memories and meaning. So John, who attends our church, back in 2008, was up flying in a hot air balloon, not far from here. And the basket caught on fire. He miraculously survived and then later wrote a book about it and describes it. If you talk to John about those moments, he will describe how there are a few seconds that felt like to him hours. He can remember every detail, every moment, every second, every fraction of a second was loaded with these memories and meaning. Like everything came together, crashing in on him all at once. You ever feel that? There's some reason to believe that our perception of time has something to do with the speed at which we can process optical data. So you know this from experience. The average human can see up to about 60 frames per second. Like everything's blurry until that point, and then anything beyond that doesn't really make any difference. It kind of just looks the same to us. But did you know the average housefly can see 250 frames per second? Yeah, more than 4 times faster than we can. Which is why when you think you're swatting a fly, he sees, whoa, and he's laughing at you. Huh. Some think that our perception of time is tied somehow to size and speed. So a shrew, who can just fit on the edge of your thumb there, little guy. You know, his resting heart rate is around 900 beats a minute. It doesn't so much beat as it like buzzes, buzz, like a little razor or something, right? Elephant, on the other hand, resting heart rate around 35 beats a minute, right? Now, here's where it gets interesting, though. All mammals, scientists have discovered that all mammals tend to actually have the exact same number of heartbeats in a lifetime, about 1 billion. Doesn't matter if it's buzzing or it's slow. So whether you're a shrew or an elephant, you only get so many heartbeats in a lifetime. So for shrews, this is fast and furious. And for elephants, it tends to be long and slow. But here's the question we don't know. Experientially, if a shrew lives a good long life, does it feel exactly the same as an elephant living a good long life? Don't know. Maybe it does. Which brings us back to this question, like, what is time? And if we turn to science for answers, things just get more confusing. So they describe science, science describes time as the 4th dimension. So we know this, right? We live in 3 dimensions. There's breadth, length, height. So we know how this works. But if you actually want to locate something or someone, that's not enough. You need a 4th dimension. So if I say, hey, let's go meet at Starbucks, I can't just tell you the spatial location of it. We have to decide on a time. What time are we going to meet there? 4th dimension, right? But what exactly are we talking about when we talk about this 4th dimension we call time? Well, it has something to do with the continuous progression of events from past into the present, forward into the future, which is just like tells us absolutely nothing. But if you talk to scientists about this, you'll find that this progression seems, the interesting part about this progression is that it's stuck. It's stuck in one direction. It can only go in one direction, which they call the arrow of time. And this stuckness seems to have something to do with the second law of thermodynamics, right? That everything heads from a state of order to disorder. That's the arrow of time. Everything is stuck, which is why Sean Carroll, physicist, when he describes human life, he describes it as the swirl of cream in a cup of coffee. That we are those beautiful, intricate, dramatic swirls of chaos unfolding a fraction of a second before everything collapses into complete disorder forever. Which brings us back to the question that Camus asked last week. Should I have a cup of coffee or kill myself? Now, Einstein, he, of course, revolutionized our understanding of time with his theory of relativity, the E equals mc squared stuff. So suddenly what was hidden became obvious, that time is actually married somehow to space itself. That space and time, they can't really be separated. They're inseparably linked into a single reality that we call the space-time continuum, which means that time itself isn't nearly as fixed as we once thought. That a second is not a second is not a second. That it depends on certain features of the place you're at and where you're at and how fast you're going. So if you hop in one of those Elon Musk like spaceships and you fly up to the nearest black hole, they've seen one recently, so you fly up there, go check it out, and then you come back. By the time you got back, we would all be dead. And I'm not just talking about the length of time. If you could instantly get there and instantly come back, we would still all be dead. Why? Because time itself, when you get into this immense gravitational pull of a black hole, time itself slows way down. And so time for you might be a few hours, and for us it might be 100 years. Similarly, things happen when you go close to the speed of light. This then gives us this different picture that time is relative, gravity and speed affect it, and so we begin to get what scientists call the block universe vision of the universe. It's not just height, depth, and width, but it's also married to time itself. The reality itself is layered. There's past, present, and future layers to reality, which leads to all these curious questions like, is reality only what exists right now, right this second? That's called presentism. Or is there some sense in which reality actually exists past, present, and future? That reality is all the layers at once. Because mathematically, I'm told, there's lots of reasons to believe that. This is called eternalism, which suggests that all three layers of reality, past, present, and future, exist, but you and I are stuck in the now. Which makes me wonder, when I pull up to my old farmhouse and I feel this immense weight on me, is that just something in my head? Or am I somehow glimpsing a greater reality? Is it somehow true that all of those moments are real and existing? Don't know. The third major view of time is that it's an illusion. Time does not exist. It's just a way of making sense of reality that is actually much more complex, and time itself is just how we make sense of it. Now, if you're like, Anderson, this is enough. This is just ridiculous. You're saying time doesn't exist? What are you talking about? And I'm like, I totally agree. This is totally ridiculous. But have you ever heard of a little thing called quantum mechanics? I originally, in my sermon, had a 10-minute excursus explaining all of quantum mechanics to you. But I thought, I'm going to kill everyone. So let's just consider a few things. All right? In and under and behind all things, time and space itself, there's something that cannot be explained by time and space. So, in my experience, something cannot be in two places at once. It doesn't work like that. But somehow, at the quantum level, it does. It does. Google superposition. In my experience, Schrodinger's cat there, it's either dead or alive. It's got to pick one. You can't be two things at once. It's one or the other. But in the quantum level, it can. In my experience, if a tree falls in the woods, whether someone's there or not, there's going to be a big old crack and you're going to, there's going to be a sound. But at the quantum level, things behave differently depending on whether you observe it or not. The very act of observing changes reality. In my experience, cause always comes before effect. It's just that's the way it works. Every time, cause, effect, cause, effect. That's the way the universe works. But at the quantum level, it doesn't seem to work like that. Time doesn't seem to be a factor. It's almost as if time itself doesn't exist. So that's weird. Are you feeling lost? I am. When we peek behind the veil and begin to see reality for what it truly is, it is so much stranger than anything you or I could even make up. There's something bigger at play than what we can taste and touch and smell and feel. And if we pull this into the context of the ancient Near East, what the teacher is struggling with right here, he's looking at these two conflicting views of time, and he's pinging back and forth between these two ancient views of time. The first is that time is cyclical. The time is cyclical. So if you lived in ancient Israel and you asked any of your neighbors, like your Assyrians or Egyptian or I don't know, any Mesopotamian, even some of the Greeks, you said, hey, I'm trying to make sense of my life in the sweep of time. Will you help me out here? You know what they tell you? A story about the gods, about Marduk or Ra or Shamash, some epic story. And they say, and Mot, the god of death, he stopped all life. And then Baal came, and the god of thunder, and he killed him. And then suddenly there was life and rain again. So that's how we got the dry season and the wet season. You're like, ah. You see, time is this endless cycle that has precisely nothing to do with you. Time, it's not headed anywhere. Your life isn't heading anywhere. It just is. So working, eating, commuting, grocery shopping, house cleaning, shoveling the snow, the stuff that humans like you and I do, that has no plot. That has no arc. That has no meaning, no direction, no story. Like maybe the king's life, it might have some meaning in it because he's the son of a god. But you and I, we're out of luck here. Life is just an endless cycle of seasons. Time isn't heading anywhere. Your life doesn't mean anything. So if you want to hear about this from a more modern perspective, Friedrich Nietzsche, he pulls this in and kind of gives us a creative spin on this. He calls it the eternal recurrence or infinite recurrence, this eternal return. It's the view that we are stuck an infinite repeat, and there's no way to break out of it. So in the beginning, there was nothing, and then suddenly, bang! And these stars form, and then planets, and then there's planet Earth, and life emerges. And then humanity comes, and then it comes to its peak under the President Donald Trump. And then everything begins to die and cool and crumble off into nothingness. Solar death, the sun burns out. Then everything collapses in on itself until everything gets so compacted, back to one single point. The time and space itself collapses on itself. It's the end of time. There's nothing, and then bang! Stars, planets, Earth, Donald Trump. It's the eternal return. This past summer, we visited Lake Garda in northern Italy. And while we were walking around, we stumbled upon this. It's a street sign, Friedrich Nietzsche. And we discovered that this was a favorite vacation spot of his. And I'm walking there with wife and the kids, and we passed by this sign via Friedrich Nietzsche. And I was like, kids, you don't want to go that way. I know where that road leads. That leads to nihilism and death and despair. Yeah. Appropriately, it is a dead end. So one view is that time is cyclical, but the ancient Hebrews had a different view of time. Time is a storyline. So when the ancient Hebrews tried to make sense of the sweep of time, they told stories about a God who engaged with particular people. A guy named Adam, a woman named Eve, Abraham, Sarah, Lot. In particular places, Eden, Beersheba, later Bethlehem, Bethany, Jerusalem, Judea, like real people, real places you can actually go to today. That the meaning of time is not rooted in some timeless gods, but in Abraham, Sarah, Egypt, Palestine. It's worked out here, now, on planet Earth, in real time, real people, real places. So one of my favorite examples, take Genesis 5:15. There we read, Mahalalel was the father of Jared. Now, what does that mean to you? Yeah, absolutely nothing. And yet, I find great hope in that. You know why? Because that's critical to the story of God. Don't lose me here. The story of God. If you want to know the story of God, it has something to do with this guy named Mahalalel. You need to know him because God cares about him and has included him in his story. That means God's story is wrapped up in individuals you've never heard of. That means there's space for you and me in it. That's a big deal. So individual, particular people, they matter to God, to the storyline, to what God is doing across time. You and I, we matter to God because time is a storyline with a beginning, middle, and end. It has meaning, plot, significance. It's headed somewhere. And you and I, we're caught up in this. We're part of the story. We get to be part of this great, great story. Now this is a very different way of viewing time. And the teacher, he finds himself caught between these two views. On the one hand, he listens to all of his neighbors, and he looks at life, and he says, it just looks like some meaningless cycle that none of it seems to make sense. And then on the other hand, he's heard the stories, and he's felt it in his heart. It has to be going somewhere. There is meaning. I felt it. I've seen it. I felt the weight of all time compressed into a moment. I felt this before. And so this just spills out on the next few verses, this bouncing back between faith and doubt. Verse 11, he has made everything beautiful in its time. He says, when I try to make sense of the sweep of time, I can see that God is bringing all the pieces together into one majestic whole. That the times of life, all these seasons, even the ones I don't understand, especially the ones I don't understand, I can see that God is somehow weaving these together to create a tapestry across space and time, making them beautiful. So I will never forget, I was interviewing Dr. Jennifer Weissman, who is the former head of the Hubble telescope, an expert on exoplanets, the planets that are outside of our solar system. And this is the largest event we had ever hosted ever. And I'm sitting there up on stage interviewing her, and she says, kind of out of nowhere, well, thank God for volcanoes and earthquakes. And I'm like, why don't you just throw in like mosquitoes and the DMV in there? Huh? Yeah. What? Where are you going with this? And then she explains, though, if it weren't for tectonic plates crashing into one another and volcanoes erupting, the Earth's crust would harden and cool, and life as we know it would be unsustainable. God is giving us volcanoes and earthquakes so that the earth can be renewed again and again and again. I was like, huh. You see, if you pull back far enough, if you step back far enough, even volcanoes and earthquakes can start to look beautiful. But the moment you pry into this, you pry something deep open in our souls. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. You see, humans have the ability to step back and look at the sweep of time. We can imagine, at least. We can't see it all, but we can imagine the block universe. But at the same time, we're trapped inside of the block universe. We can imagine it, but we're trapped inside of it, so we can't make sense of it. Only someone who's outside of space and time could possibly have any perspective on space and time. Only someone who's outside of it could possibly see how all of the moments of the universe somehow compress into one thing, one story. Only God could live in the eternal now. And yet somehow, this is within us. Like we long for it, we feel it, we're built for it. We long to taste and see and experience all things. Even though we're finite, we have this infinite desire within us, this infinite longing. We can imagine the eternal, though we're trapped in this little bit of time. He has set eternity within their hearts. He's let us peek behind the veil, that we know that all things must somehow come together, that time must be headed somewhere, that my life must mean something, but no one can fathom it. Only God. None of us can possibly see this. We can't comprehend it. It's beyond us. It's beyond explanation. And even if God did let us somehow see it, what words would you possibly use to describe it? God sees how my life makes sense across the sweep of time. He holds it all in his hands. But the moment I try and grasp it for myself, it slips through my fingers and spills on the floor. And this leads the teacher to confess, verse 12. I know that there's nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. Now hear this. Heidegger's wrong. Life, you're not thrown into life. It's a gift. It's not thrownness, it's givenness. It's not Geworfenheit, it's gift. Life is gift from a God who loves you. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it, nothing taken from it. God does this so that people will fear him. He says, I know that the story of time is not dependent on me. It's his story. It's not. Get this. I am not the main character. He is. He is. Whatever is has already been, and whatever has been before, and what will be has been before, and God will call the past to account. So he's saying the present, it's fixed within a season that I did not choose. So you're in a season right now that you didn't choose. You can only recognize it. It's given by God. And the past, it's out of your reach. I can't change the seasons. I can't change the past. But God can. But God can. He's not bound like we are. So this last line here, God will call the past to account. It literally translates, God will seek out that which has been chased away. So this is, Ian Proven, the scholar, points out that this is a shepherding metaphor. Get the image. It's a sheep, a lost sheep that's been chased away. And the shepherd, the good shepherd, goes after the lost sheep. That you and I were stuck. We can't go after that. What's happened in the past is in the past. But there is a good shepherd who will go and hunt down and redeem the things that are out of our reach. There's a good shepherd who can go and hunt down the things that happened in your past and somehow redeem that. But even as he confesses this, the doubts are still there. And I saw something else under the sun. And the place of judgment, wickedness was there. And the place of justice, wickedness was there. I know that God's working. But there are a lot of the pieces in life right now that just don't seem to fit together. I have no idea how God is possibly going to fit this together. And then he comes back to confession. I said to myself, God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked. For there will be a time for every activity, a time to judge every deed. That, yeah, right now I see this brokenness, but somehow God's going to pull this together. Somehow God is going to bring this together on a little thing we call Judgment Day. Now, you and I, we don't usually think of Judgment Day as a positive thing. We're not always like, oh, look forward to that. All right? But that, I just want to point out, is because we are entirely spoiled. We live in a culture that was built upon Christianity, Judeo-Christian principles. And so we live in a basically just society. We live in a society where we still get outraged when a bad person does something bad and they don't get caught and they don't get the penalty. We get outraged when someone can buy their way out of justice. We get outraged. We think that's outrageous. But let me just point out, in most of the world, for most of human history, injustice is the norm. It is. Justice is not normal. That's what's rare. So this was driven home to me when I read this little book called Exclusion and Embrace by a theologian and genocide survivor, Miroslav Volf. He argues that the only reason why Christians can freely forgive those who wrong us right now and not demand justice here and now, well, it's Judgment Day. So listen to his perspective. He says, imagine speaking to people as I have, whose cities and villages have been first plundered, then burned and leveled to the ground, whose daughters and sisters have been raped, whose fathers and brothers have had their throats slit. Imagine that. Says your point to them, we should not retaliate? Why? Why shouldn't we seek justice right here, right now? Why in the world could you just, as a Christian, say, I'm not going to seek revenge on them? I say the only means of prohibiting violence by us is to insist that violence is only legitimate when it comes from God. Judgment Day. God will hold them to justice. That's why I can freely forgive. I'm not saying genocide is okay. I'm just saying that I can trust God with it because He alone can rightly judge, and He will. Therefore, to genocide survivors, Judgment Day isn't bad news. That's not bad news. It's good news. Justice is coming. A day is coming because time itself is headed somewhere. And that somewhere, in the end, God will somehow, He will seek out the past. He will bring together all the broken, frayed pieces, and He will make something beautiful out of it, even if I can't imagine it right now. But I can trust Him with it. But we don't see this in our lifetime. So the doubts still persist, and he leaves us with these two massive questions right before we end. Number one, are we really any different than the animals? I also said to myself, as for humans, God tests them so that they may see that they are like the animals. Surely the fate of human beings is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath. Humans have no advantage over animals. Everything is hevel, meaningless. Question number two. Is there really life after death? All go to the same place. All come from the dust, and to the dust return, quoting Genesis. Who knows if the human spirit rises up and if the spirit of the animal goes down to the earth? Who knows? If all you can know in life is what you can figure out, what humans can figure out through human wisdom, through science and through biology and through geology and through history and through literature and through all the studies of humanities, if all we can know is what human wisdom can know, then the answer is, who knows? Now, of course, this is not the final word on these questions, because Ecclesiastes asks the question that the rest of the Bible answers. So we actually have reason to believe that humans are different from animals, and there is life after death. Because in the fullness of time, the Apostle Paul's word here, in the fullness of time, the God who is outside of time humbled himself, entered into time, into a particular man, into a particular place, into a town called Bethlehem, into a man named Jesus. And he spent his time on earth in real places you can go and visit today, Bethlehem and Nazareth and Bethany, with real people, Peter and John and Mark and Mary and Martha. The one who appointed the seasons and the times was himself subjected to them. The good shepherd who will hunt down every lost sheep across time itself was slaughtered like a sacrificial lamb. The judge who's waiting at the end of the time on the cross, he experienced the justice of God on our behalf. He is the Alpha and the Omega. He is the one before and after all things. That in him, every moment, past, present, and future, every moment is somehow compressed into this one man, into this one moment, so that he could truly say to us, before Abraham was, I am. I am. It's as though his life was not constrained by the arrow of time, as though he was somehow both in and out of time at the same time. And this Jesus, he assures us that we are in fact more than animals, and there is in fact a judgment day, and there is in fact life after death. And this is coming from someone who died and rose again, so perhaps he knows a thing or two about what he speaks of. But to the teacher's point, this is not anything that you or I could figure out on our own. This is the type of answer, like life itself, that can only be given from above. And this is where his reflection ends. So I saw that there's nothing better for a person than to enjoy their work, because that's their lot. That's what God gives you. For who can bring them to see what will happen after them? You can't see it. So you want to know how to make sense of your life in the light of the sweep of time? Embrace your limits. Come to peace with the fact that you will never, ever, ever figure it out. And you don't have to. You don't have to. If you open your hands, you can receive life as it truly is, a gift from God. And that's how you begin experiencing, at least in part, what the Apostle John calls the life of the ages. It's this taste of eternity, the taste of the life of God himself. The eternity that you were created for, you and I can get in on that, but it's not something you can grab for yourself, not something you can take for yourself. It's something you have to open up your hands and receive. You have to surrender. It's only by gift when you surrender to the good shepherd. Then you find yourself caught up in his story, not yours. Now, if you're struggling like, oh, but Paul, how do I make sense of my story in light of his story? I hear there's a really great workshop on that next Sunday. Maybe you should check that one out. Let's pray. Father, I pray right now that you would work in us by your Spirit to allow us to see what we can't see, to trust you with the things we cannot know or understand or make sense of, Lord. For those in here right now who are just struggling, grasping to try and control time, trying to slow it down, trying to make it, master it, Lord, and feel dominated by it, Lord, I pray that you would bring them to a point where they just feel utterly overwhelmed so that they open their hands and receive the gift you want to give them. And God, all of us need reminded of this day after day after day. So I pray that you do that. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.